Retiring at 50 in Ireland. If you retire at 50 in Ireland, your pension has to last nearly half a century. So the question isn't how big your pot is, it's how long it survives. This isn't about fantasy numbers or early retirement influencers. This is about what your pension can actually sustain when you're planning for 45 years of retirement, 16 of those years before the state pension even begins. In this video, we'll walk through 3 pension pot sizes: €250,000, €500,000 and €1 million, and show you exactly what income each can realistically provide if you retire at 50. We'll factor in inflation, fees, the state pension and safe withdrawal strategies. And by the end, you'll understand the 5 levers that matter more than pot size alone. Ground rules and assumptions. Before we dive into the numbers, let's set our framework. We're modeling a couple who both retire at age 50. They're planning for income all the way through to age 95. That's a 45-year retirement, far longer than most people will experience. But the risk isn't dying too soon, it's living too long and running out of money. Their pensions remain invested in a balanced portfolio: 60% global equities, 40% bonds. Historically, this type of mix has returned about 7 to 8% per year, but we're going to be conservative and assume 5.5% net of fees. We'll also assume 2% inflation each year and 1% annual fees for investment management. All figures are shown in real euros, meaning they already account for inflation, and they're shown before tax. The tax-free lump sum isn't spent immediately. Instead, it's set aside in a deposit account, earning 1.5% net.
This provides a buffer for flexibility without overstating long-term growth. And finally, the state pension begins at age 66, paying just over €15,000 per person, so €30,000 combined for a couple. It's inflation-linked. Think of this as our framework, not a prediction, but as a baseline to see what each pension pot can actually sustain in early retirement. Why retiring at 50 is harder than 60. Retiring at 50 is fundamentally different than retiring at 60, and not just because of the extra decade. When you retire at 60, you only have to bridge 6 years before the state pension kicks in at 66. That's manageable for most pension pots. But when you retire at 50, you have to bridge 16 years. That's nearly 3 times longer. Your pension has to carry the full load with no state support for a decade and a half. And this is where something called sequence risk becomes critical. Sequence risk is the danger of poor investment returns early in retirement. If markets fall in your first few years, when you're already withdrawing income, your pot takes a double hit, withdrawals plus losses, and it becomes much harder to recover later. The early years matter disproportionately. A bad market at 51 or 52 can derail a plan that would have worked fine if those same losses happened at 71 or 72. That's why retiring at 50 requires much more conservative assumptions and much larger pension pots than most people realize. Let's start with a pension pot of €250,000 at age 50. If we apply the conventional 4% rule, this couple could theoretically draw down €10,000 per year.
But let's be honest, €10,000 a year for a couple isn't retirement, it's survival. So let's stress test it against something more realistic. Suppose the couple want to live on the median disposable income for a retired couple in Ireland, about €42,800 per year. That's not extravagant. It's a reasonable standard of living once the mortgage is cleared and children are independent. But here's the issue. At that spending level, the €250,000 pot is exhausted by age 58, not 95, not even 66, age 58.
Why does this happen so quickly? Because between age 50 and 66, the ARF is carrying the entire load. There's no state pension to ease the pressure. The couple are withdrawing heavily from a pot that's also trying to grow and keep pace with inflation. The orange bar representing the ARF gets eaten away almost completely in those first 8 years. By the time the state pension would arrive at 66, there's nothing left. The takeaway is stark. On its own, a €250,000 pension pot cannot sustain even a modest lifestyle for a couple retiring at 50. But now let's bring in the state pension and see how the picture changes. From age 50 to 65, the couple rely entirely on their €250,000 pot. This puts enormous pressure on those early years. But from 66 onwards, the state pension becomes the anchor, covering about €30,000 of their annual aids. When we model this properly, the couple can sustain about €27,500 per year all the way through to age 95. Notice that's much lower than the €37,250 we'd see if they retired at 60. Why? Because those extra 10 years of withdrawals before the state pension arrives force the pot to work much harder. Here's how it works in practice. In the early years, the couple draw heavily from their ARF and their tax-free lump sum. From 66 onwards, the state pension provides the foundation, and the ARF only needs to bridge the gap.
So the lesson is clear. A €250,000 pot can support early retirement at 50, but only if you're willing to live on about €27,500 per year, and only if the state pension arrives as planned at 66. Now, let's move up to a pension pot of €500,000 at age 50. You might assume that if the pot doubles, the income would double too, but that's not how retirement math works. When we model it, the maximum sustainable income rises to about €41,750 per year. That's a significant step up from €27,500, but it's nowhere near double. Why? Because those first 16 years from age 50 to 66 are still the bottleneck. The ARF is under enormous pressure during that period. The withdrawals are high and sequence risk is at its most dangerous. If you look at the model, the orange bar shows the ARF being drawn down hard in those early years. The blue bar, the tax-free lump sum, helps smooth things out, but the strain on the ARF is still significant. Once the state pension begins at 66, the pressure eases, but by then, some of the damage is already done. That's why a €500,000 pot doesn't produce twice the income of a €250,000 pot. It produces about €41,750 sustainably, a meaningful improvement, but not a doubling. Now, let's push it even further.
What if you retire at 50 with a pension pot of €1 million? If the couple stick with the same sustainable income as they did at 500,000, the 41,750, the pot doesn't just last, it massively overshoots. By age 95, they'd still have about €1.4 million in today's money left in their ARF. Why does this happen? Two reasons. First, the tax-free lump sum is much larger. It absorbs a bigger share of the early spending, so the ARF isn't hit as hard. Second, because the ARF is protected in those early years, it has time to compound and outpace inflation over the long term. Under a cautious drawdown, the pot doesn't just survive, it grows. But not everyone wants to preserve wealth. Some people want to maximize their income, enjoy their retirement, and aren't concerned about leaving an inheritance. When we model that approach, the maximum sustainable income comes out at about €62,500 per year. Compared to 41,750 with a 500,000 pot, a 1 million pot supports about €62,500 right through to age 95. And once again, the goal here isn't tax efficiency or estate planning, it's answering the one question that matters. What lifestyle can a 1 million pot actually buy if you retire at 50?
Let's put all three scenarios side by side. A €250,000 pot supports €27,500 per year. A €500,000 pot supports €41,750 per year. A €1 million pot supports €62,500 per year. Notice the pattern. When the pot doubles from €250,000 to €500,000, income only rises by about €14,000. But when the pot doubles again from €500,000 to €1 million, income rises by about €21,000. Why doesn't it scale evenly? It's those first 16 years, from age 50 to 66, before the state pension begins. That's when the ARF is under the most pressure, and no matter how big the pot is, those years cap how much income you can take sustainably. The other big factor is the tax-free lump sum. A bigger pot means a bigger lump sum. The blue bar covers more of the early years, giving the ARF room to grow instead of shrink. So pot size absolutely matters, but it doesn't map one-to-one into income. What matters just as much is timing, drawdown strategy, and the role of the state pension. The 5 levers that matter more than pot size. Your outcome isn't fixed, There are 5 levers you can control that make a bigger difference than pot size alone. First, retirement age.
Even delaying from 50 to 52 or 55 transforms your results. Fewer years to fund before the state pension and more years for contributions to compound. Second, contributions. Small increases add up quickly. Topping up in your 40s gives compounding decades to work. And with Irish tax relief, every €100 you contribute could cost as little as €60 net. Third, withdrawal flexibility. Don't lock yourself into one fixed income for 45 years. Take more in strong years, scale back in weak years. That flexibility protects your pot. Fourth, investment approach. Too conservative and your money won't grow enough. Too aggressive and you risk big losses at the wrong time. Balance matters, especially early on. Fifth, regular reviews. A plan won't last untouched for 4 decades. Check it every year. Update assumptions, review performance, adjust as life changes.
These are the levers you can control, and together they often make a bigger difference than the pension pot size alone. Let's address some common concerns. The state pension won't exist when I retire. The Irish state pension is a cornerstone of the social system. The age may rise, but the pension itself is extremely unlikely to disappear. It's politically and socially too important. Markets are too risky. That's why we stress test. We don't assume average returns, we model thousands of scenarios to see how often the plan holds up. I'll just work it out later. The problem is, later becomes now very quickly. The decisions you make in your 40s determine what's possible in your 50s. Here's the reality. Retiring at 50 in Ireland is possible, but it requires planning, realism and flexibility. A €250,000 pot can support about €27,500 per year. A €500,000 pot supports about €41,750. A €1 million pot supports about €62,500. Understanding income sustainability matters more than headline pot size. And the levers you can control, retirement age, contributions, flexibility, matter more than almost anything else. If you found this useful, drop a comment. What age are you targeting for retirement? And does this change how you're thinking about it? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.